Dragonfolk, as we move closer to the PQ season and the beginning of organized play for Flesh and Blood, the market is experiencing something that I think a lot of people are very confused about. Let's go ahead and talk about it. Welcome on in, Dragonfolk. I hope you're all having a fantastic day. I know I am. My name is Ashen Wings, and today we are going to talk about something that is very, I don't ever really like talking market stuff, although I'd love to truly chat about it as we go forward. But I just started kind of my journey into Flesh and Blood as a new player about November, right? Dynasty release was my very first armory. And ever since then, I've been looking over and over, all over the place for cards of varying nature to help me kind of get a good collection as a player, right? I know I'm going to be a player. I'm planning to go to all these organized events, and it's going to be a fantastic time. But something I had noticed is that a lot of the cards are spiking in prices in such a strange way that it can only be one of two things. So let's go ahead and talk about what those two things are. And of course, right, I don't have any kind of metadata in the entirety of this. So if anybody in the comments has any kind of, outside information, you don't have to start calling people out or whatever, but let me know about any of this as we begin to talk about it. So first, I want to talk about what it could possibly be to begin with. And that is buyouts. Okay? Buyouts are something that a lot of TCGs, even Magic the Gathering does in fact have this happen pretty often, in which a card is essentially targeted by a group of individuals or maybe one individual with a lot of money, and they want to capitalize on the market specifically for that card. So, for instance, you take a card like Gaia's Cradle, right? Gaia's Cradle is already a very expensive card in Magic the Gathering, and so you look at Gaia's Cradle and you go, wow, okay, it's really expensive already, and there's, 40 copies on the market. Well, a buyout would essentially consist of somebody buying out maybe 10 to 20 copies of Gaia's Cradle a month. Maybe less. But the same kind of method can be done for everything, right? Even if it's like a $5, rare or whatever, if that card is bought out in mass in a week's time, what happens is there's less supply. And because there's less supply, the market gets kind of in a chokehold of sorts. And this does cause a problem in regards to players being able to find the cards that they want. Let's say there's a commander that's becoming more and more popular amongst the people. MTG Goldfish makes a video on some new commander, or the Commander Quarters makes a video on some new commander, and it's like the coolest thing that you've ever seen, and as a weird investor flipper kind of person, right? Not that you're weird, but, maybe you're a little weird, right? Yeah, maybe you're a little weird. That these cards are going to be sought after, right? It's going to be a card that's going to be hot. Even if it's hot for like a little bit, it's hot. And so what you want to do with your infinite wealth, essentially, or your group of friends' infinite wealth, is you want to buy out cards. So this could very well be happening for Flesh and Blood as well. There are a lot of very generic cards that have recently kind of spiked in price and also have had their supply diminished very greatly coming into this PQ season, this ProQuest season. The beginning of the organized play, right? The cash prize, big stuff. Magic the Gathering's got Pro Tours and, regional championships and so on and so forth. So this is just Flesh and Bloods, right? Now, coming into here, obviously, it is a great opportunity for people who have, a ton more money and more time and supply invested into this game to essentially just hold out on cards and never sell them. Hoarding things in a way that allow them to sell them for a much, much higher price than they would normally go for, simply because they can, right? Buying out of something is essentially you controlling the market. You control so much, or you have so much of the supply of that product that you get to make the price. You tell people what they need to spend in order for you to buy the card. And now, while this is essentially just the capitalistic society in and of itself, it does suck to see because a lot of the cards that are being bought out, if they are in fact being bought out, are cards that are important to players. And they're in their like unlimited versions, essentially. You look at things like Tome of Findal, right? Tome of Findal is a card that was reprinted in History Pack Volume 1. And it was originally, when it first came out, was going for like $6 from what I can tell. And now it's coming up to about $10 a card. Most decks will run anywhere between 2 to 3, and it became a big tech into Dromai not too long ago. I do believe things like Kano and maybe Icelander run it. I don't think Icelander actually runs it, but Tome of Findal essentially was given as a tech for several decks during this Dynasty testing season, and it gave enough information for Tome of Findal to become more popular. And so this is where we get into the second part, which honestly I think is more feasible than buyouts, but that's just because I don't have the data for buyouts. You know what I mean? What we're seeing with a lot of stuff is we're seeing people get interested in Flesh and Blood. Much like myself, there were a lot of people who were, transitioning from Magic the Gathering over to Flesh and Blood. And while I am still covering Magic the Gathering here on the channel, I am playing Flesh and Blood more in person, right? Most of my Magic stuff is on Arena. And on Arena, you don't have to worry about buyouts. That's just the name of the game, right? But when you look at something like Flesh and Blood, you have a lot of people entering the game, and there's just not a lot of cards. Magic the Gathering has got reprints upon reprints upon reprints, and I made a whole video on reprints that, people can go look at in regards to, but there's so many reprints that buying out all of these reprints of a single card, right? Like you're not going to be the person who's going to be sitting there with 300,000 copies of Duress. You're just not, right? That's not something that you're going to feasibly do. Now, 300,000 copies of something like, I don't know, a Scalding Tarn might be a little bit more in the alley of a buyout, right? There have been buyouts of reserve list cards, such as, Psychic Allergy from the Dark. That one has been bought out. It was, of course, the buyouts always, they reflect differently in Magic than they do in Flesh and Blood, or at least for right now, because the people who are buying out old reserve list Magic cards are following a trend. And then once those people who cannot hold on to these cards because they genuinely don't see a change in the market fast enough, they sell them and they get dumped back for their price. And now you can buy Psychic Allergy for way less than what it was when it was being bought out. So in a case like Flesh and Blood, the second option as to what could possibly be happening is that there are more people entering the game. More people are looking at the top meta decks, which everybody is going over in their entry to ProQuest. You've got a lot of different podcasts, a lot of different channels here talking about the decks you're going to see, the decks you might want to run, the counters, and the strengths and weaknesses to certain decks that you may see at your ProQuest. And with this being the case, there are people who will probably just purchase a whole bunch of these cards in order for themselves to be more prepared for a ProQuest. Let's take Crown of Providence, for instance, right? Crown of Providence is a generic headpiece, probably one of the best generic headpieces to date as of right now. Crown of Providence is a legendary that can only be found in Uprising, right? So there's no first edition There's no unlimited. There's just what is out there. That is the whole staple behind it. It has not been reprinted yet, and we are not sure when it will ever be reprinted. Probably not until what could very well possibly be History Pack Volume 3, and that is probably a little while away from now. So, Crown of Providence being one of the most powerful headpieces to wear in regards to blocking and getting advantage on blocking, this card was going for like 120 when I started in November, right? $120 in November. Now it is going for $300 for the rainbow foil version. Not even the cold foil, the rainbow foil version is going for $300. That is a huge spike in price. Now, again, we're looking at whether or not this could be a buyout, or it could be players trying to get the headpiece that is run in just about every single meta deck at this time. Everybody wants a Crown of Providence. And now I don't think everybody has the money for a Crown of Providence, but I do believe that because Uprising is such a new set, not a whole ton of people have probably been cracking as many boxes as one would think. There are not a lot of Crown of Providence out there on the market. And if there are, now we have to look at what the market is trying to tell us. Is the market telling us that Crown of Providence is actually worth more? Or is somebody out there buying up all the Crowns of Providence because they know that it's the meta card? That people are going to want to play Crown of Providence because Crown of Providence is a generic headpiece that is run, again, in just about every meta deck at this time. So it is a weird kind of back and forth between trying to figure out what these buyouts mean, right? A lot of people, including myself, are even looking at things like Findel Spring Tunic, right? Findel Spring Tunic was going for, I want to say, back in November, which was only 2 months ago. I think Findel Spring Tunic was going for about $170, $180, right around there. And now it is almost at $300 for a Findel Spring Tunic. Now that is mind-blowing because, again, Findel Spring Tunic is a very, very popular card and is, again, used in many of these decks. Not every one of them, but a good portion of them do, in fact, use Findel Spring Tunic. This is a card that is, you need it almost in a way to make your deck at the highest level it could possibly be for the high-level play that is the Pro Quest. But is it players buying it, or is it flippers buying it, right? Because at that point, you would think that it would have been bought out in mass a long time ago, right? Findel Spring Tunic has been out since Welcome to Wraith, and it's been printed 4 times in regards to it being that case. So why would there consistently be more and more buyouts essentially for these cards? And that's kind of where I'm trying to figure out, is that, are these buyouts happening, or are they players and a huge influx of players who are trying to get to a competitive level as quickly as possible? Everybody is trying to get their stuff ready for ProQuest. Everybody is trying to push and train and get everything they need together, all their Majestics, their deck lists. They need to get all their legendaries that they need to run. It's important for them to do that in order for their deck to run properly. And if you don't have those cards, well, you're not running the same deck. Now, again, a lot of what we see going up in price is a lot of speculation and also just general talk. I mean, mostly generics seem to be hit by this because they can be used in anything. But if you look at This Round's on Me, This Round's on Me is from Everfest and was like almost never used. So with This Round's on Me, you see that there's a significant change. I mean, This Round's on Me is now going for anywhere between, I think, like $18 to $24. When it was originally released, the card was only going for like $5 to $7. But because now it's somehow a consensus that, This Round's on Me is exactly how you beat Fi, one of the more popular decks in the meta right now, is it buyout people, a person or several people who are buying out these Majestics and wait for other people to buy them at the price that the buyout individual is willing to sell them at? Or are people just buying up play sets like nobody's business? Because there's an awful lot of sales on TCGPlayer in regards to this card, and now the supply is just going to keep dropping if it turns out that anybody who tops any of these tournaments is actually running this rounds on me. So again, we see a weird kind of duality between, what is a card's general worth. Are there people out there who are buying out these cards and holding on to them and essentially just dangling them over players' heads and going, hey, you shouldn't have this, or if you want this, you have to spend $30 more than everybody else? I mean, look at Surgical Extraction, right? Surgical Extraction is a Majestic from Dynasty, one of the Assassin Majestics. And Surgical Extraction went through the ringer, and there were people who were essentially going, well, Surgical Extraction was short printed, right? People who have opened cases upon cases upon cases in cases of Dynasty have a hard time pulling a Surgical Extraction. And I feel like that was probably an opportunity for a lot of people to start naming their own price when they got one. Because if there's truly not a lot of Surgical Extractions, and the odds of it being reprinted are not anytime soon, you have an Assassin set coming up in Outsiders. Assassin is getting more support in Outsiders. So I would imagine the Surgical Extraction, one of the best cards for Assassin right now, that card is going to continue to fetch a high price because not only do we know it has been short printed, but the odds of it being reprinted in the literal next set are probably very low. So if this card ends up being the one all be all of Assassin cards, there's going to be probably a good portion of buyouts for this, because if it's been short printed, you could sell that card for $100. That would be $100 Majestic for simply the fact that the wide audience knows that the card has been short printed. And that, of course, everybody who might want to play Assassin is going to probably need that card. And so people who buy that out, people who have tons of money, can buy out Surgical Extraction and essentially hold on to hundreds of copies of the card. And then, once they have hundreds of copies, and nobody can find a single Surgical Extraction on the market, they can then sell those Surgical Extractions for whatever price they want. But if Surgical Extraction is being bought out because of players, and players somehow are finding $120 to drop on a play set of Surgical Extraction, then the players are at least getting the cards, and that's what's, an important thing. But as far as players getting the cards, right, that's really what we want, right? That's what we want, is players to get the cards. There's a whole reason that there's, unlimited sets and reprint white border sets and so on and so forth. There's a reason for that. And the reason being is that these cards that were of such worth and from the older sets needed to be brought back into the market as a kind of uglier version of itself in order for the players to get a hold of them. And now you see people who are essentially targeting cards and bringing up their price, or it's just a flavor of the month thing. And it's going to be exactly like Psychic Allergy in Magic the Gathering, where you have a huge spike and that $13 card all of a sudden is $40 to $50. And then if you just wait till after, let's say, PQ, or maybe let's say after this organized play session, or maybe halfway through it, we're going to see a change, right? When Outsiders comes out, we're going to see a change in meta. And it may not be super drastic, but we will see a change. And when that happens, cards will begin to fluctuate. Now, does that mean that holding on to these generics is going to make you thousands of dollars, right? I don't think it will. I think if you hold on to alpha versions of these cards, I think those are going to be well worth it in the end. If you hold on to old, Crew, Arcane Rising, Welcome to Wraith, first edition cold foils, I think those will be worth something. But do I think that you holding on to unlimited stuff and being like, yeah, we're unlimited, even if unlimited is in fact out of print for a couple of these sets, it's not the point, right? The point is to make sure that we have players playing and that collectors are collecting. But of course, we always run into that issue where people will take the money aspect of the game and sit there and go, well, we can't do this with Magic right now because there are people who just will not give up their supply. And we're too late to the game. But Flesh and Blood is booming right now. And Flesh and Blood is very new. And because it's new, you can target it, right? These Majestics that cost anywhere between $2 to $5, you spend $100, you get a good portion of those Majestics, and then you can just hold on to them. But what do you need 25 of those for? You know what I mean? Like, buying a couple play sets, I understand for some decks, but like, you don't need to buy 25 of Coax a Commotion or 25 Pummel, right? Like, there's no reason for that. There's no reason for you to own, 10,000. Like, it just doesn't make any sense to me, right? Coax Commotion obviously is a Majestic and Pummel is not, so like, this is a completely different variable, but you know what I mean. So let me know in the comments down below what you guys think. I'm curious what you guys are all feeling in the Flesh and Blood community about something like this. And I know, it's a problem that we over at the Magic the Gathering community have dealt with for some time. But of course, at some point the card gets reprinted and then it's not so much an issue anymore. But with such an early stage in the game like Flesh and Blood is, I understand how hard it could be for somebody to want to play Assassin going into this PQ, expecting everybody to just be like, oh, we're never going to expect Assassin, as one never does, and end up having to go, okay, well, I can't really afford $120 worth of cards because, like, I don't even think Black Tech Whisperers goes for that much. And if it does, right, it's like the only legendary that goes for that much. Everything else, you're probably running Tunic, so, like, that's a thing, but I digress. Let me know in the comments down below what you guys think, and I'd love to hear from all of you in regards to this concept. I'm well aware capitalism exists, and we all have to kind of live in its world, but I don't know. Don't be a dick, right? Well, while you're down there writing that comment, make sure to like the video and also subscribe to the channel as well if you have not already. I like to talk about Magic the Gathering and Flesh and Blood from a player/collector standpoint, so if this is kind of the kind of content that you like to talk about or like to listen to more specifically, you are always welcome here. And we do have a link in the description down below for a Patreon if you wish to support me in a more monetary sense. And we even have a channel membership here. So if you wish to support me in that way, that would be most appreciative, but it is absolutely not necessary. So thank you all so much for watching. I, again, really appreciate your support. And I will see you all very soon. Nerd out.